This is The Weight of Secrets, written by Beryl Coops.
The Weight of Secrets. The bar had no name anyone used, just a neon anchor that fizzed and bled red light onto the nicotine-stained ceiling. The docks pressed their smell through the door, diesel, wet rope, the Thames at low tide. Everything else was old varnish and old grudges, a bent dartboard, a one-armed bandit with 3 bulbs forever out, a mirror behind the bar that turned the room into a smear of ghosts. Marcus took the last booth because it let him keep Brick at his back and the door in the mirror. He'd wedged a beer mat under the table leg to stop the wobble. The whiskey in front of him had sweated itself into tap water, the ice long gone. His fingers drummed a pattern he didn't recognize at first. 3 quick, a pause, 2, until he remembered it belonged to a different life, a different crew. She was late. Of course she was. Claire understood time the way a locksmith understands steel. It wasn't about arrival, it was about pressure. Back when they were kids on borrowed motorbikes and borrowed courage, she'd learned how to make a minute feel like a verdict. He had learned to wait. He told himself he was here because he had no choice. He'd told himself a lot of things lately. The door went and a draft shivered the smoke. Conversation dipped by a beat, the way it does when the air changes. Claire stepped in and brought the room down to her size without raising her voice or her chin. She never dressed to be seen. She dressed to be taken seriously. Dark coat, collar up, a scar you'd miss unless you knew where to look. New shoes, wrong for the docks, though she walked in them like she'd break the ground before it broke her. Marcus watched her in the mirror as she took the temperature of the bar. 2 stevedores haggling over nothing, the barmaid bored enough to be dangerous, a man by the fruit machine feeding coins without pulling the lever. Claire noted them all and noted that he was noting them, then came to him as if she'd just made up her mind. She slid into the booth opposite with a small smile he couldn't read. It had never been for him to read. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, and even to his own ears it sounded like an accusation because it was safer than sounding like relief. "You called," she said, crossing one leg over the other, the heel of her shoe tapping once on tile. "I was curious." With Claire, the space between the words was where the knife was kept. She never wasted anything. Not questions. Not breath. He rubbed the stubble along his jaw and felt the urge to look past her, to the door, to the mirror, to the habit of not trusting anything that stood still. He had practiced this conversation in the shower, on buses, while pretending to sleep. But rehearsals are lies, and the truth was here, 10 inches away, smelling faintly of cold air and petrol. "You don't belong here," he said. It wasn't what he'd planned. It was what was true. "And yet," she said, without looking away, "here I am." She nodded at the glass. "You going to make me watch you drink water all night, or are we going to say what we came to say?" He made himself take a swallow. It tasted of taps and time. Beyond Claire's shoulder, the mirror gave him the door again, and in its murk he caught a small movement. The barmaid shifting her weight to see round a pillar. The fruit machine man's dead coin paused halfway to the slot. The barman polishing a glass that hadn't needed polishing for the last 5 minutes. None of them were looking at him. That was what worried him. "Out of the blue is a bit generous," he said, setting the glass down carefully so it didn't knock. "Blue suggests clear skies." "Storms, then," she said. "Fine. You called in a storm." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Claire, listen." Her expression didn't change, but she leaned back, giving him the floor the way she used to when they were in rooms like this for uglier reasons. The red light broke across her face and left half of her in shadow. He had asked her here because he needed someone he could trust, and he didn't trust her because he could still remember exactly how it felt to be betrayed. Both could be true. That was the trouble with getting older. The world didn't simplify, it doubled. "You remember the yard in Poplar?" he said, buying himself a second he couldn't afford. "The one with the dogs. How we, Marcus. No warmth, no malice, just a warning not to drown them both in nostalgia." He shifted in his seat. Inside his coat, the envelope pressed against his ribs like a second heart. He could feel the imprint of the seal through the paper. He hadn't opened it. That was either caution or cowardice. He hadn't decided. "You don't have to be here," he said. "You walk now, I won't follow." "That's sweet," she said, "and not true." He looked at her properly then. The new shoes, the good coat with a cuff seam recently let out, a tiny crescent burn on her wrist, fresh enough to be pink. Solder, not cigarettes. Money had touched her since he'd seen her last, but work had too. Someone paying, someone asking. "You working?" he asked. "Aren't you?" He glanced past her again. The fruit machine finally sang, 2 lemons and a cherry, though he hadn't seen the man move. The neon anchor popped and came back with half its letters dead. The barmaid's smile arrived late to a joke no one had told. "I called," he said, "because I don't like the way the ground feels where I'm standing." "Then change ground." She tilted her head. "Why me?" "Because when they were 19, she'd sniffed out a tail he hadn't noticed and saved his life, and because when they were 25, she'd left him on a stairwell to bleed so she could save hers. Because she knew where the floors creaked. Because she always arrived late and somehow exactly on time." He felt the bar contract around them. Or maybe it was just his chest. "You're going to tell me why you called me out of the blue," she said quietly, "or we're going to talk about the past for another minute and a half until whoever you're trying not to look at gets bored and becomes a problem." Her eyes flicked once, not to the mirror, but to the condensation ring his glass had left on the table. In the oval of water, her fingertip wrote a quick curve and 2 dots. It looked like nothing. It looked like habit. It was the mark they'd used as kids when a room wasn't clean. Marcus didn't turn. He didn't need to. The weight in his coat felt heavier. Claire's voice stayed level, almost bored. "So," she said, motioning at his drink, "are you going to tell me why you called me, or are we just reminiscing?" The Weight of Secrets, Part 2. Marcus let the silence run long enough to feel like a choice. The envelope under his coat was a hot stone against his ribs. "We've got a problem," he said at last. "I found something. About the shipment." Claire didn't nod, didn't move. She only took her fingertip off the little sign she'd traced in the water ring and set both hands flat on the table, empty, listening for real now. Go on. He could still lie. He could still tell her he was skittish, that age had finally turned the screws on his nerves. But the thing about Claire was that lies bounced off her and came back with teeth. He swallowed. "It isn't what they say," he murmured. "It's not weapons." A tiny tilt of her head. "Then what is it?" He wet his lips and tasted old whiskey and metal. Words crowded his throat and wouldn't choose an order. "It's not good," he managed. "Worse than anything we've ever put our hands near." "Marcus," she said, leaning in until the red light broke over the bridge of her nose, making it look like she'd just come in from the cold. "What's in the shipment?" He should have said it. He should have taken the weight from one set of shoulders and given it to 2. Instead, he glanced at the bar. The barman had been polishing the same glass for 5 minutes. It was a kind of prayer. The barmaid laughed at nothing and checked the clock. A couple in the corner argued without moving their mouths. "I can't," he said. "Not here." Claire sat back and exhaled, but the sound carried more calculation than frustration. "You do this every time. Hook and yank. Attach, detach. If you wanted to waste my night, you could have sent flowers. I'm trying to keep you alive. Who says I need saving?" "You don't understand," he said, and hated himself for the words. He dropped his voice to a whisper that barely crossed the sticky table. "This isn't just a job, Claire. It's bigger. It moves on rails we don't see." "Then put me on the platform." He hesitated, and in the hesitation, the room spoke. The fruit machine chimed without the lever moving. The man beside it, a brown trilby coat too new for this end of the docks, didn't drink, didn't slouch, didn't belong. He was watching their reflection in the mirror, not them. Obvious. A decoy. Or a warning. 3 o'clock, Marcus murmured. "Hat. He's not here for the fruit." Claire didn't turn. "Too clean," she said softly. "Hands like paper. He's theatre. Real eyes are by the payphone." Marcus's gaze stayed on her, but in the glass behind her shoulder he caught it. A man in a donkey jacket pretending to read the racing page and failing to track a single line. Another at the end of the bar with a coat left buttoned indoors, collar tight despite the heat, shoes polished to the point of apology. The barmaid shifted to keep them both in her periphery. Claire had been right with 2 flicks of her eyes and a drawing in condensation. "This place is sewn," she said. "You brought a thread." He felt the coil close. He looked down so no one would see the panic hit, then up again when his pulse agreed to behave. "Out the front," she said, standing with the kind of grace that didn't attract attention because it never asked for it. "Slowly. You first. Leave the glass." He shot the whiskey down because habit said never leave a measure unfinished, then set it neatly on the table as if he'd only ever been thirsty. As he slid out, the beer-match shim he'd wedged under the table leg earlier skittered free. Claire caught it with 2 fingers, tore the corner off and left the larger piece behind, a message to anyone who knew how to read that the table had been unbalanced and was now worse. They moved. Past the bar, Marcus kept his hands outside his coat so no one could mistake intent. The smell of bleach rose from the floor where something had been mopped in a hurry. The barman's glass finally stopped shining. The trilby didn't follow. That was almost worse. At the door, Claire paused as if to light a cigarette, thumb rolling a dead match along the striker. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. In the mirror, the man in the donkey jacket folded his paper. At the end of the bar, the buttoned coat unbuttoned. "Now," Claire said and pushed the door. Night hit like cold water. The docks hummed low and constant. A ship's horn moved through the fog like a slow animal. Sodium lights made everything jaundiced, the wet cobbles, the brick, the breath that came white out of their mouths. "Left," Claire murmured, "not the main road." They stepped into the alley. Behind them, the neon anchor popped again and died for good, and somewhere inside the bar, a coin dropped into a payphone with a sound that felt like a clock starting. Stap, The Weight of Secrets, Part 3. The alley took the heat out of them. Wet brick, the stink of the river, a strip of amber light from a dead-end yard. Somewhere beyond the warehouses a lorry changed gear and the sound folded into the fog. "Well," Claire said, not breaking stride, "talk." "I shouldn't have called you," Marcus said, raking a hand through his hair. He meant it, and he didn't. She caught his sleeve, a small, immovable pressure. "Marcus." He looked at her properly, past the cool, past the habits. She wanted the truth, not money, not leverage, answers. "The shipment," he said. "It isn't weapons, it's people." For the first time that night, something slipped on her face. "What?" "They're moving people," he said, quieter now that the night had grown a second set of ears. "Selling them, like cargo." Silence, even the river seemed to hold its breath. "Who?" she asked at last. "You know," he said. "You know the kind of men who can make the police deaf and the docks blind. You're sure?" He swallowed and dug inside his coat. The envelope came free with a small tear of paper against lining. The wax had the imprint of a seal he didn't recognize, something like an anchor if you squinted. "I didn't open it," he said. "Chain of custody, if there is one." Not anymore. She turned the envelope in her hands, feeling the weight with her thumbs the way she would a lock. "Match." He passed her the book from his pocket. She didn't light anything. She used the dead stick to tease the flap up without cracking the seal. Old trick. Then slid out the contents. A folded manifest, an index card with pencil marks, a tiny key taped to a scrap of masking tape, a single photograph. She checked the alley mouth once. No movement, but the kind of stillness that meant something had chosen not to move. Then opened the manifest. The paper was thin and oily, the carbon copy smudged. "Dock 11, berth C, blue anchor," she read. "Tonight, 2:30. Her finger traced a line down a column that pretended to be numbers and was in fact a lie. Units, 97. Line items coded as machine parts. She said it like an accountant reading a grocery list. Only her jaw had gone tight. Marcus nodded at the photo. "Look." It was a Polaroid, flash hot and crooked. A container yard at night, the side of a blue box with a stenciled anchor and a string of letters. A man in a donkey jacket halfway into frame. And there, small, blurred but definite, 2 silhouettes by the chain link. One had her hands in her pockets. The other had a slouch Marcus hoped he didn't recognize. Claire's eyes didn't linger on the figures. They went instead to the index card. Someone had written in careful block capitals, then corrected a letter as if it mattered very much that it be neat. She stilled. "What?" Marcus asked. She turned the card so the sodium light could find it. On the ruled lines, a short column, 3 entries. Open quote, cargo Blue Anchor. Confirmed 95 unlisted to be moved. 01 Ghost 01 Wolf Claire confirmed. Ghost 02 Reed Marcus pending. Close quote. The night pressed in. Marcus felt the ridiculous urge to laugh and didn't. Ghosts, he said. What is that, a joke? Not a funny one, Claire murmured. Her thumb rested against her own name as if to smudge it into something else. Ghosts are off-ledger items. Special handling. People who know things. People who cost more. He found the wall with his back. So they're not just moving people. They're moving us. Or planning to. She flicked the card with a nail. Pending means confirm contact, then wrap. The bar wasn't a net. It was a funnel. From the mouth of the alley, a car door clicked shut. Not slammed, placed. A voice said something in a low register, and another answered with a cough that wasn't a cough. Claire slid the photograph back into the envelope, then the manifest, then the key. The seal went flat beneath her finger as if it had never been lifted. Who has this kind of reach? Marcus asked, because the question was safer than the answer. You called me because you already know, she said, and because you hoped I'd tell you you were wrong. I hoped, he admitted, for once. She glanced up and down the alley, then stepped close enough that he could smell cold air on her coat. We don't go home, she said. We don't go where we've ever been more than twice. We are boring and unmemorable for 48 hours. Then we make it expensive. How? By taking 97 people off their books in one night. She looked at the tiny key taped to the scrap, and by using what they gave us. A shape eased into the alley mouth. The trilby from the fruit machine, hat brim wet now. He didn't advance. He waited. Behind him, at the far end, a second figure appeared by the yard gate, the buttoned coat unbuttoned. The alley learned their names and repeated them to the brick. Claire's hand slid into her pocket, came out with nothing but a cigarette. She didn't smoke it. She let it sit on her lower lip like an idea, then took it away again. On 3, she said. Not run, walk. Past the skip, through the yard, over the fence, and we are already in tomorrow. You ready? For what? For being ghosts. He nodded. He didn't feel brave. He felt awake. 1, she said. The payphone inside the bar began to ring. Once. Twice. The sound came thin through the door and thicker through the walls, counting out a choice. 2. The car at the alley mouth dipped as someone climbed out of the back. Claire's eyes found his and held them, and he had just enough time to remember the wet outline of an anchor above a nameless bar and realize it had been a sign and not a decoration. 3, she said and smiled without humor. Blue Anchor then. Let's cut the rope. They moved, not running, as the men at either end discovered that the ground here didn't run straight, and that 2 people who had once lived by other people's clocks could still, when it mattered, keep perfect time.
This was The Weight of Secrets, written by Beryl Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.